Peace Park is essentially an environmental conservation area which can be used as a place for building trust and harmony.
This simple yet visionary idea has spread to every continent. In upcoming years, over 227 border zones could become peace parks, ranging in size from a few hectares to immense natural reserves. 60 have already been created, 5 in America, 2 in Asia, 4 in Europe, and more than half in Africa. In a land fractured by artificially drawn colonial borders dating from the 19th century, these transfrontier parks do more than simply reunite ecosystems and offer sanctuary for wildlife. Concretely speaking, they foster the economic development of their border nations, thanks to the ecotourism boom. A profitable ecology that pushes nations to cooperate and sometimes overcome former conflicts.
I think the main point about peace parks to keep in mind is that they are representative of the role the environment can play in bringing human communities together.
This utopia in action, on which the future of Africa and perhaps even the world rides, was one of Nelson Mandela's final dreams.
It is important if various countries across boundaries work together, that unites those countries, and the boundaries become something unimportant.
The desire to heal Africa through peace parks was born in these valleys of the Cape on the tip of South Africa. We owe it to the determination of an ecologist patron who managed to bring Nelson Mandela on board for the cause, Anton Rupert.
Dr. Anton Rupert was good friends with President Nelson Mandela. And even shortly after his release, they had their first meeting. When Dr. Rupert told him about the idea and about the concept, President Mandela was immediately supportive.
Together, they created a Peace Parks Foundation that was inaugurated in 1997.
At the dawn of a new Africa,
around the table, Anton Rupert and his 2 ambassadors, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and the President of South Africa.
Anton Rupert and Prince Bernhard have sent me to various places, and I've put aside everything because it is important.
In this footage from 2001, President Mandela opens the fence separating South Africa from Mozambique to create a transfrontier park connecting the 2 countries. Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, named after the river flowing through Zimbabwe, Mozambique and South Africa. It took 10 years of political negotiations and the end of apartheid to overcome this international border separating 2 countries long ravaged by war. 20 years earlier, from 1976 to 1992, rebels armed by South Africa's apartheid regime fought the communist government of Mozambique that backed Mandela's ANC. A wound this peace park managed to heal.
If you think about it, the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, which was created between Mozambique and South Africa, were both in an apartheid struggle for years, and the other country was in a civil war for almost 20 years. And those 2 countries could set aside those really big obstacles and go one step further to say, here's an international boundary and a fence between ourselves, and we agree and we take it down, which is actually, if you think about it, very progressive and very visionary even 10, 15 years ago.
Underlying this vision borne by Anton Rupert and his foundation was an ecological drive, expanding the surface area of the largest game reserve in South Africa, Kruger National Park. Its fences were built in 1961 to protect wildlife from extinction. Since then, several gates have been built to allow tourists to enter. Inside, the park spans 20,000 square kilometers of preserved savanna filled with protected species. These elephants can come and go as they please. One may admire them from one of the rare roads, occasionally from quite close. The only condition, visitors must remain safely inside their cars. There are only a few areas within the thousands of hectares where visitors are allowed out of their cars to observe the wildlife and scenery. These birds have no trouble crossing the park's fences. But this isn't the case for herds of mammals. Zebras suffer when electric fences prevent them from following their ancestral migratory path.
In wildlife, you need vast open areas for big game to operate in. Fencing areas is just counterproductive to big game reserves, which you require for tourism. You can't not show people lion, elephant, cheetah, wild dogs. If you have fences, these animals won't exist because you'll be fencing them off from migratory behavior and bigger areas. Therefore, it's critically important that to create bigger areas, fences obviously have to come down.
This was the thinking, enlarging the area required for the animals, that led the Peace Parks Foundation to focus on uniting the ecosystems of South Africa and Mozambique. And here is what the border post inside the park looks like today. The Giriondo border post, a simple formality that allows one to easily pass from Kruger to Great Limpopo, from South Africa to Mozambique. Besides reinforcing ties between the two nations, the creation of a park on the Mozambique side made it possible to transform this former hunting concession, traumatized by years of war, into a protected reserve. This forest ranger walks along a path that was laid with mines by his own battalion back when he was a soldier in the Mozambique army.
This is the road right here. Back during the war, this whole area was mined. The mines here protected all the way to that road. We laid mines against the enemy, and the enemy against us. That's why the site was abandoned. But now the mines have been entirely cleared, and we can pass through here once again.
Now the paths are safe. Here is one of the rare battle scenes on offer in the park today. Two male nyalas naturally slowing down their metabolism to size each other up before a fight.
My life used to be very different from the way it is today. Back then, you had to cultivate a plot of land in order to eat. You couldn't earn money to buy food. Ever since I was hired by the park, my life has completely changed. Nothing is the way it was before.
Limpopo National Park has brought many positive developments with it. It has greatly contributed to improving the region. This is evident in the villages surrounding the park. Their inhabitants have a much higher standard of living thanks to the park and tourism.
Anthony Alexander also works for the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park. But he is South African. He was appointed by the Peace Parks Foundation to develop the project. Every day he endeavors to encourage wildlife, in particular elephants, to return to this part of the park, despite the years of hunting and mines.
Elephants live to 70 odd years, and they've got an incredible memory. So 70 years ago they were quite regular in Mozambique, and then of course the war came in the 70s and 80s, and they all moved to safety in South Africa. So it was a very gradual process for them coming back into Mozambique. It was initially the translocation, and an elephant are quite intelligent. They can feel and sense where the mines are, and they're very wary of human impact as well. And with time, we're seeing more and more come over. They realize that it's safe.
To develop the park, over 4,000 animals, including numerous elephants and zebras, were moved from South Africa to Mozambique, where they are now free to thrive and reproduce.
It's magical. I mean, 5-6 years ago, you wouldn't have seen this. Beautiful water, beautiful vegetation, beautiful zebras, really special. It's a long process. It's a slow process to get the wildlife numbers up. But its proximity to Kruger National Park is key. I mean, Kruger gets over 1 million visitors. If we can get 100,000 or 200,000 of those visitors, the park will be financially self-sustainable, and that's ultimately what we're looking towards.
Ecotourism is 90% tourists from overseas destinations. And these are the people that are driving the initiatives relating to wildlife tourism. And with that, obviously, employment much needed and foreign currency earning.
And Africa, it's not an industrialized continent at all. There's not a lot of manufacturing taking place. But there's incredible landscapes and incredible wildlife. So if for every 8 visitors to Africa, you create 1 job.
Peace parks have the potential to augment economic activity. And so we should not just think of them as naive ideas, utopian ideas, but as potential opportunities for economic development and growth in border regions.
For the time being, there are very few lodges open on the Mozambican side. Take this rustic hotel, for example, Mashampane. The only guests are a handful of South Africans in the know, or else foreign tourists looking for a stopover point on the way from Kruger Park to the beaches in Mozambique. To attract more visitors, there needs to be an increase in wildlife. Roads need to be opened up and the infrastructure developed. All of this implies intensive cooperation between South Africans and Mozambicans.
So I'd just like to discuss the Shingwedzi Cliffs Trail.
Back in the days of apartheid,
We'll be doing a
Something like
field
this was
visit with
unthinkable.
Kruger Park.
Anthony,
from
the South
Sunday
African, works
to the
under the
cliffs,
orders of
to
Antonio, the
experience
Mozambican.
on how we're going to get across the border, how we're going to operate the trail.
And just to remind you to take with you the tourism manager, just for him to be exposed into this environment.
With the creation of Limpopo National Park, several initiatives were undertaken to make the zone accessible. Because the goal is to allow visitors to come and see the great potential this region has.
I think that's one of the beauties of the Peace Parks concept, is it enables people to move across boundaries, to set aside those differences and to really see how they can look at optimizing the shared natural resources for the benefit of all the partners. It's not your elephant or my elephant or your bird or my bird, it's ours. Recognizing that, to then put in place mechanisms to help manage and protect those shared resources.
But one danger lurks amid all these efforts: poaching. Local hunters, paid by traffickers, have already killed a few rhinoceroses in the Mozambican park to sell their horns.
So this is more than likely a poacher's fire. You can see the way they've burnt the tips of the wood. Not too much coals. Poaching, in particular rhino poaching, and in more so elephant poaching, is perhaps the biggest threat to the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park.
If the rhinoceroses die, the park could die too for lack of visitors. This threat is yet another reason encouraging South Africans and Mozambicans to join forces and stand guard against a bane that plagues the entire region. For the proponents of peace parks, the solution lies not in building higher and higher fences to protect the territory, but in fostering co-development and creating jobs through ecotourism. This is still the best way to discourage poachers and limit illegal immigration.
There's a lot of pressure on the GLTP to put fences up because there's a belief that it stops poachers, but the reality is a fence doesn't stop a person, a fence can only stop wildlife. This fence can be jumped over quite quickly. If you look at the border between USA and Mexico, the most technologically advanced fence, it doesn't stop people. And I think the best method is to make sure that there's economic prosperity on both sides of the border, and one can do that through tourism, which is the most suitable land use for this area. And by doing that, one doesn't need fences anymore.
My dream, wouldn't it be wonderful if from the sea of Mozambique to the Drakensberg Mountains, there are no fences? I mean, in an international, I think that was one of Dr. Rupert's aims and objectives through peace parks. Peace parks was to form smaller areas, but with the idea of growing them greater and greater.
Today, there are over 33 of these identified peace parks in Africa. In southern Africa, there's 18, jointly cover an area of over 1 million square kilometers, which is a significant expanse of land. I mean, that is equivalent to the size of France and Germany combined. In fact, it's a little bit bigger than that.
Certainly the Peace Parks Foundation and their work in Southern Africa makes a very cogent economic case for peace parks, and they have used it quite admirably as a means of attracting tourism, particularly in transboundary areas. So there is clearly an economic case to be made for peace parks, and not just a utopian, naive idea.